Hello and welcome to this second watercolor session. So we meet after a very short time. This scene somewhere near Marienplatz in Munich, I think, offers a very nice subject for today's session because today I wanted to paint with you another street scene but with a difference, the one that does not have much depth to it, a kind of very in your face subject like this scene in front of you. It's a storefront. While drawing streetscapes, when the subject has a lot of elements like buildings, cars, humans, etc., with a nice vista, it's relatively easier to create interest, to decide on a focal point, and then to lead the viewer's eyes into it. But here, in this session today, it may be interesting to see how we can create an element of interest when there is apparently none. So let's see, when there are very few elements to deal with, can we have the viewers engage in some kind of a visual dialogue? And the colors we'll be using for today are the John Brilliant, alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, cobalt blue, French ultramarine, neutral tint. These 6 are the main colors, and for highlights there will be yellow chrome, rose madder and manganese blue. So that will be the complete palette for today's session. While sketching, we must think about the composition and how we would like to treat our subject. First of all, we have to decide on the motion of the viewer, how a viewer sees the subject while moving across it, and our perspective must suggest that. So while viewing, the viewer can quickly relate to his past experiences, scenes which he or she may have seen in transit. Next, let's think of the way we normally react with this kind of subjects. Momentarily, isn't it? We see a mass of light and dark and some colors. So our depiction of this scene must also be similar. No point in putting a lot of details because that will be rarely seen. Third, if at all, what is noticed more closely? I think these are the signages, the texts, the colorful awning, etc. So all these we have to do in little more detail, because seeing a shop, the viewer may subconsciously start looking for them, and not finding these would cause a kind of cognitive dissonance. And last, but certainly not the least, what connects the viewer with the subject? Where is that dialogue? Yes, the shoppers themselves, because the viewer projects himself to his position and starts communicating with the subject, like how he stopped momentarily and shaded his eyes against the glare to see what is being sold inside. So this is where the eye of the viewer finally rests, and hence this should be our area of interest. And we should go about developing this painting with this in mind. So this is how the painting looked after the first wash. In the last session we spoke about creating contrast by using strong colors. This is actually another way by which I have found we can create very strong contrast, which is treat the peripheral objects with a certain amount of looseness and you know less of details as compared to the focal area, the central subject. So much so that when I checked with my wife yesterday for her feedback on how the painting is progressing, she said it's looking dirty. And with certain amount of courage, I have been able to ignore her comments. For the sake of art, we have to take such risks. But never mind. Once we complete, we'll get back to her and get her opinion again. After the background, we start painting the figures which are the lightest parts in the focal area. It will help us immensely if we could practice drawing figures, because if the human figures are nicely done, I think the quality of our paintings can improve considerably, especially figures in motion or some specific action which is frozen in time and gives life and meaning to our paintings. Like how this lady is shading her eyes against the glare to see what is inside the store. I think the story of this painting is all in that single gesture. Right now, we'll treat the figures very lightly with some highlight in manganese blue and all, and we can come back later for value correction. Next, we paint the signage. As I stressed before, this is going to be a very important part of this painting. And here again I would like to paint it like one big shape of the letter and its shadow, the arch, the signage again, and then finally the awning, letting all the colors merge to create a more credible visual experience. For the signage here, I use a strong color, bright one, alizarin crimson, so that it stands out. And then I put some dark colors, mostly French ultramarine and a little bit of manganese blue, which I will mix on the surface, adding some water to it so that it flows easily. I do some lifting here and there to denote reflection. The area close to the viewer must be done very carefully, with some details being seen and shades coming down, folds at the awning, they must be paid attention to. Cutting around the figures and tilting the board to mix the colors, mostly French ultramarine and neutral tint. Some of my colors are mixed on paper, for which you'll find me frantically turning my board at times. Sorry for that. But because of this, I can achieve quite unexpected and beautiful results, as the colors, they tend to granulate better and the texture of the paper comes out. Finally, I'll put in the darkest darks, which will hopefully create the maximum contrast, and my central subject, the shoppers, would pop out. To do this, I need to pre-wet the area around the figures so that there are no hard edges which could distract the eye. And then, keeping my board at an angle, I would drop in the paints, ultramarine, alizarin and neutral tint, and just let them mix under gravity. I'll slowly build up the value by adding more tint, slow but fast enough to ensure that the surface is still wet. Otherwise, I'll not be able to get that wet in wet effect, which is what I'm after. some splattering for texture. And then correcting the value of my figures very lightly so that they look as if they belong there and not some props added from somewhere to make them look more realistic, I would say. In the focal area, edges are very important, and this is where the eye would appreciate a lot of hard edges, because this is where the eye is focused. So we must take care of the edges, they must be very sharp and hard. With the rigger, now I put some dark marks here and there to denote some shape like the store window, doors, etc. very lightly, and the movement of the brush strokes is almost like a sketch. I finished this painting with some touch up here and there just to complete this story. So now this is the finished painting. Our focal area has come out quite well, I think. We have been able to create some interest in the subject because of its human elements, which are made to stand out by means of contrast and the use of appropriate highlights. All in all, quite satisfactory, and for what it's worth, even my wife liked it.